In this video, we'll analyze 3 Magnus Carlsen games where he plays against world-class opponents and proves why he could be the best chess player ever. The first opponent is also Magnus's first World Championship opponent. Viswanathan Anand starts d4 and Magnus replies knight f6. White unveils the queen's gambit with c4 and black replies e6, opening up his bishop. White's knight c3 battles for the center and black negates the knight with bishop b4, pinning it to the king. White follows with f3, preparing to advance either in the center or even on the king side. And there isn't really a quick way for black to exploit this weakened diagonal, so he carries on in the center with d5. White plays a3, asking the question to the bishop, who captures the knight, damaging white's pawn structure after he recaptures. Magnus charges ahead with c5, challenging white's powerful d4 pawn. White captures on d5, undoubling his own pawns, and black recaptures with the e-pawn, which gains space but does give him a backwards d-pawn, which means it cannot be defended by other pawns. White pushes e3, opening up his kingside bishop, before black pushes c4, gaining even more space on the queenside, along with control of key squares in that area. But white has no fear, because after knight g to e2 and black's knight c6 developing, he launches the g-pawn, expanding on the kingside. Black castles and the white bishop fianchettos to the now vacated g2 square. Magnus maneuvers his knight to a5, looking at the cozy b3 square, and white castles, getting his king out of the center. Black's knight b3 attacks the rook, who is cleverly lifted a square so it can maneuver along the second rank. Then black begins a plan to create a passed pawn on the queen side, namely the c-pawn, by eliminating white's c-pawn, and this starts by pushing b5. After white moves the knight to g3, eyeing up potent squares on the king side, black pushes a5, preparing to push b4 and eliminate the c-pawn. Then white pushes g5, and black's knight is forced to retreat. Magnus prudently drops it to e8, where it can still defend the king side. White thrust forward in the center with e4, hoping for a capture so he could open the f-file for his rook. With white's attack looming on the horizon, black captures the bishop on c1 in an attempt to simplify the game. After white recaptures with the queen, black lifts his rook to a6 to defend the kingside laterally. White pushes e5, gaining valuable central space, before black moves the knight to c7 with a purpose that we'll see shortly. Then black carries on with his kingside plans, playing f4. Magnus finally breaks with b4. White takes the opportunity to eliminate his weak isolated a-pawn by capturing with it on b4. Black recaptures, opening the rooks to one another, and white captures the rook before black recaptures with the knight so that it can defend the b-pawn. White chooses not to waste any time and fires out f5. Black's b-pawn borders on promotion as it advances. Then white swoops his queen over to f4, looking to swing it over to the h-file with an attack in mind. Black rapidly retreats the knight from its duties on the queen side to defend the king, before white's attack nears its endpoint after f6. Black would be unwise to allow white to open the f-file for his major pieces, so he closes things down with g6. White moves the queen to h4, and this sets up a brutal mating combination. Magnus plays knight e8, his only move to defend against the incoming checkmate. White's queen jumps to h6, tying the knight down to the defense of g7, and this also locks up the black rook in between the king and the knight. On the other end, black pushes the b-pawn one square away from queening. White follows by lifting his rook to f4. This allows black to get a queen for free with check, but white will soon swing his rook over to the h-file with what appears to be an unstoppable checkmate. Now white should block the check with his bishop. Black would be forced to play queen d1 so that after white's rook h4 threatening checkmate, black could retreat the queen to h5 to defend. White would take the queen with his knight, and after black recaptures, he would take the pawn, recreating the checkmate threat. But black would be just in time with bishop f5 defending. At this point the game would reach a deadlock, since most of black's pieces are stuck defending against checkmate threats, so he can't convert his slight material advantage of a knight for 2 pawns. White can even play a move like rook h3, covering the base of his pawn chain in the case of an attack, and because black wouldn't even be able to take the rook without allowing a new indefensible checkmate threat. Back to the game. After all this time assembling his attack, white chooses the wrong piece to block the check. Knight f1 is a fatal mistake, and black has only one move to win the game. Can you find it? The move Magnus plays is Queen e1, and white resigns. Right now, black is up a full queen, so if white does not make something happen soon, he will lose. But if he plays rook h4 threatening checkmate, then black would just give up the queen for the rook and emerge up a full rook, because that queen used to only be a pawn. In this case, white would run out of pieces for his offensive and would not have enough pieces to fend off black's counterattack. In this game, Magnus's adept defense and tactical vision were on full display, as he expertly seized his pivotal winning opportunity. The next opponent is one of Magnus's biggest rivals. Hikaru Nakamura starts e4 and Magnus replies e5. White's knight f3 attacking the pawn is followed by knight c6 defending, before white sends the game into the Roy Lopez with bishop b5 undermining black's control over the center. Black continues knight f6, attacking e4, and white takes the knight on c6, doubling black's pawns. Now both central pawns are undefended, so white plays e3 solidifying it while opening up his queenside bishop, and black plays bishop d6 to defend while preparing to castle. White's knight b to d2 aims to move to a more active central square, and black develops his final minor piece with bishop to g4 pinning the knight to the queen. White immediately kicks the bishop and black drops it back, maintaining the pin. Then knight to c4 advances the knight and plans a clever knight maneuver. Magnus takes inspiration from his opponent, retreating his knight to d7 in order to maneuver it to another more active square. White follows with his plan, moving the knight, and black responds with knight to f8. White's knight jumps to f5, and it looks like the g7 pawn would be difficult to defend, but the black knight comes just in time, protecting his own pawn. White pushes g4, forcing the bishop back to g6, and white develops the bishop to e3, potentially preparing a queenside castle. Black pushes c5, gaining a firmer grip over the center, and white fights back with c3. Then black's queen to d7 is followed by queen c7 before both sides castle queenside. Black pushes the f-pawn, solidifying his center and opening up a square for his bishop. Then white slides his king over to b1 and black does the same before white thrusts forward in the center with d4. Magnus cannot let his c-pawn be captured because it would open up a pin on the bishop to the queen, all while attacking the bishop with the pawn. So black takes with his c-pawn. White recaptures with his pawn, and it's looking like the d-file might open up and black could be in trouble. Black takes the d-pawn, leading to a pair of knights being exchanged and the white rook landing on d4, where the doubling of the rooks will soon happen. But Magnus cleverly calculated that at this point he could capture the powerful white knight that is attacking the bishop on d6 with his own bishop, and it wouldn't matter which way white recaptures, in this case with the e-pawn, white can no longer quickly take advantage of his control over the d-file. We are making our way into what could be an equal endgame, which is Magnus's bread and butter. Black follows with h5, creating counterplay on the king side. After white doubles his rooks on the d-file, black captures the pawn on g4 and white recaptures before black sidesteps the queen out of harm's way. White plays queen a4, setting up a trap. He wants to move his rook, either taking the bishop or attacking the queen, while opening up his own bishop to support his queen onto a7. But this can't fool Magnus. He pushes b6 and his position is as secure as a steel safe. White's queen leaps to c6, but there just aren't any threats. Black moves his bishop to e5, attacking the rook and forcing the rooks to be exchanged. White tries to make this happen on his terms with rook d7. Black captures and white recaptures with his rook, landing it menacingly on the 7th rank. But Magnus finds the only move to turn the tides of this game in his favor. He exploits black's weak king position with queen b4 threatening checkmate. White blocks with his bishop supported by his rook, taking advantage of the fact that black cannot take the bishop without hanging a quick checkmate in two. But black as usual follows with surgical precision, playing bishop to d6, cutting off the rook's defense of the bishop and threatening to take it with his queen. Now white's best bet would be moving his bishop, which would give away the pawn behind it. But white knows he wouldn't be able to hold on in a worse endgame, so he plays queen e4 defending his bishop. At this moment, Magnus finds the winning move. Queen a4, threatening not only the rook, but queen d1 checkmate. White would have to stop the ladder, losing a full rook. So instead, he just resigns. Magnus's defensive strategy in this game was impeccable, leading to a crushing defeat once his opponent overextended. The final opponent is world champion Ding Liren. He starts knight f3 and Magnus replies c5. White pushes e4, transposing the game into the Sicilian defense. Black responds d6, preventing the white pawn from getting to e5 so that his knight can go to f6 safely. Then white breaks in the center with d4. Black takes it and white recaptures before black develops his knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn. White's knight jumps to c3 defending, and black plays the knight-orf variation with a6, stopping enemy pieces from landing on b5 and potentially preparing a queenside expansion. Then white develops the bishop to e3, signaling his intent to castle queenside. Magnus pushes e6, taking the non-confrontational approach in the center. White replies f3, solidifying his own center and preventing the knight from landing on g4 where it could harass the white bishop. Black immediately presses forward on the queenside with b5. White plays a3, stopping any further expansion, and black fianchettos his bishop on the long diagonal. g4 by white makes this a battle at two flanks as he sets up a pawn storm on the king side. Black, similarly to white, plays h6, slowing the attack down. White moves his queen to d2, preparing to castle queenside, and black develops his knight from b to d7, looking to jump forward any of these ways. Then white castles queenside. Magnus menacingly shifts his rook to c8 on the same file as the enemy king. White slides him out of the way right away, before black breaks in the center with d5. Now white cannot push the pawn, nor does he have enough coverage of the e4 square to leave the tension, so he captures the pawn, leading to an exchange of knights and the black bishop landing on a powerful central post. White gets his rook out of the bishop's line of fire while supporting his kingside advances. Then black develops his final minor piece with bishop c5, and white carries on with f4, looking to break open black's defenses. Magnus, opportunistic as ever, moves his knight to f6, looking to immediately make use of the now undefended e4 square. White puts a halt to those ideas with bishop to d3 defending that square. So black plays queen c7, indirectly doubling up on the c2 pawn. This ties the bishop down to the pawn's defense, meaning it would no longer be a good idea to capture the black knight if it were to land on e4. White preemptively moves his queen to e1, since knight to e4, which is black's next move, would have attacked her anyway. Then white charges ahead with h4. Magnus shifts his queen to b7 to support his own pawn advances, and at this point, white slips up. His best move would be knight b3, trying to exchange pieces and dampen black's incoming attack. Instead, he plays c3 to prevent b4. But this allows black to play a wonderful tactic. The move is bishop takes a3. If white were to capture the bishop, then the c-pawn would be undefended, and black would take it with his knight, forking the king and the rook. Black would end up getting two pawns, the one the bishop took and the one the knight took, along with the rook for two pieces, which is a material point in black's favor, all while the white king's shelter has been completely torn apart. In the game, white does not take the bishop, but pushes forward with f5, trying to immediately break open the center while black's king is still there. But black's attack is just a little bit faster. Magnus pushes b4, threatening to open the b file with checkmating threats lingering. White pushes his c-pawn, keeping things closed. Then black finds the spectacular knight c3 check. White would not be able to capture the knight because black would take back with his pawn, which would open up the b file and the queen's path to the enemy king. White's only way to stop the checkmate on b2 would be blocking with knight b5. And black would not even take the knight, he would take the pawn on c4 with his bishop. This would lead to an exchange of bishops before black would eventually win back the knight, emerging up a full 3 pawns, along with white having absolutely no king safety. Back to the game, white has to miserably move his king to a1, and Magnus wins the pawn on c4 with his bishop. White takes the pawn on e6, and just as the center is about to open up, black castles his king to safety. Now white could take the pawn on f7, but it wouldn't do much other than open the f file for black's rook. He would rather black capture the pawn, allowing his knight to jump forward. So white captures the bishop on c4, and black recaptures with his rook. Now white should still avoid taking the knight or the bishop because it would allow black to open the b file with nasty checkmating threats. He lifts his rook a square to defend his second rank. But it's just too little too late. Magnus captures on b2 with his bishop, stripping away the king of its last defenses. If white takes the bishop with his rook, then black will maneuver his queen to the a file, and this would be devastating. So white takes with the king, and black pushes b3, confining the king even more. White takes the pawn on f7, and black should not take with his rook because it would unnecessarily leave his back rank vulnerable. So black takes with the queen, and white grabs the pawn on b3 in desperation. But this was a mistake. Magnus shifts his rook over 1 square to b4, and white resigns. Black will regain his sacrificed piece with 2 attackers on the knight, but not only that, he would be up a pawn and have a checkmating attack which would be unstoppable. This was my favorite one. After white moves the rook, black would take the knight, forcing the king to c1. After which he would play queen a3 check, pushing the king to the center into the hands of the other black rook. With the knight covering the king's only retreat, white would have no choice but to block with the bishop. Black would take it, luring the king into a double check with knight d1. And after king to e2, queen d3 would be checkmate. In this heated battle, Magnus's tactical expertise shone brightly, allowing him to build an overwhelming attack. I hope these games were both entertaining and instructive. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chess content.